Today we're going to talk about a little-known and underappreciated weapon called the Eku, and that is basically Japanese for boat oar. And yes, that's me. I recently caught up with my original sensei, my first martial arts instructor, for an Eku seminar. I hadn't seen him in years, so it was a great time and a perfect opportunity to talk about this little-known weapon here. Speaking, globally and overall, certainly little-known. So, it's a boat oar, as you can tell, but there's way more to it than you might expect. This is a kobudo weapon. Kobudo is basically karate weaponry. It's what I have one of my black belts in. And as a karate weapon, then it's essentially an Okinawan weapon. Okinawa is the chief of the Ryukyu Islands south of Japan, and it's the birthplace of karate. I say south of Japan, but it's important to understand in the development of Okinawan martial arts that Okinawa is really, in all those islands, they're almost equidistant from like Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, not that far from the Philippines either, so they really were their own people, and their martial arts therefore were influenced from several quarters. So if you're islanders, then you're using boats a lot, especially for fishing, and if you develop your own martial arts and like martial arts, then sooner or later you're going to realize this could come in handy in a fight. Here you're seeing the business end on 3. As you can tell, the top 2 are owned by my sensei, Dean Chapman, Shihan Dean Chapman, and the bottom one is the one I used for this seminar, which I bought, just online, typical run-of-the-mill one. There's a really cool exotic woods that you can get, like that middle one there. That's purple heart. It's heavy, strong, kind of dense wood. It's got a great, color and finish to it as well. And you certainly know I like antique weapons. Well, it's all but impossible to get a true vintage antique one from back in the day in Okinawa, but the ones owned by Shihan Chapman certainly have years on them. I think the one on top has about 20 years on it, so a lot of training, a lot of sweat has gone into that wood. So how do you use it? Well, you start with kind of the concept of the bow, the Okinawan bow, right, a staff. And, half of it, as you can tell, hey, there I am, half of it, as you can tell, is basically just that. Then you've got the blade up there, and that's what changes things. So it's kind of a halberd, glaive, naginata, skip around the world, whatever you want to call it, type weapon. But there's some important differences. For one thing, there's no metal on it, right? So this is more akin to like the hardwood clubs / swords of like Pacific Islanders in South America. So you're hitting with that edge, and you get better results, reduced striking surface, but it can cut, it certainly can, but, it's not a sharpened steel blade. Also, it's a civilian weapon, which does make a difference in your training methods and the techniques you're going to use. If you're in an army, you're a pikeman in an army, and you're next to all these other guys, there's a lot of sweeping type techniques you're not going to use, because you'll just hit the person next to you or get your weapon tangled up. These were essentially going to be used in, one-on-one skirmishes out on the beach. Speaking of that kind of typical scenario, the Okinawans enshrined a pretty devious move here. You flick sand or water up into your opponent's face with the flat of the blade and then follow up with a strike. And that's probably something you're just not going to see in, let's say, a preserved fighting style or set of techniques with, like a European halberd or something like that. Speaking of techniques specific to this weapon, legend has it that one defense against, say, like a katana-wielding samurai would be to block their sword with the edge of the oar, of the wooden blade. And that might not sound like the best idea, but that's going to get their sword to bury itself into the wood. And then they're going to have a lot of trouble wielding that. That's actually a clever way to remove that razor-sharp blade from the equation. Now, notice there's a triangular shape here. You see the ridge in the center, and then it slopes down from there? That also means the further a blade digs in, a metal blade, the more wood it bites into. More importantly, though, what that flattened triangle cross-section does is it packs more wood into the blade, right? Make it sturdier, because it's not just for pushing water with, right? It's for fighting. Hopefully you'll agree this is a surprisingly subtle weapon, right? Here, with this part, I can hit with either edge, with kind of a slash. I can thrust with the tip, of course. And then when it comes to the paddle sides, I have this one here with kind of that ridge and bulk, and that's going to hurt more than the opposite side, which is perfectly flat. And that might be an option I want to use, maybe it's somebody I know and I don't want to hurt very much. Another feature are these edges here when it gets shaved down to the staff part. Well, you can use that to catch your opponent, behind the knee, that kind of thing. Catch your opponent, catch his weapon, and if you're not careful, you can catch yourself when you have this in reverse and you're using the staff end. So the most dangerous part of the weapon is the most vulnerable, which is the edge, just like with the sword. Now, the thing there is, here it's wood, and it's not going to be razor sharp, so you can give it some extra thickness, which you can see here they did. And that's obviously to help it, put up with the battering and survive a full-on strike to your opponent or his weapon. So here's a thrust with the business end, and here's another slightly unique thing about the weapon. I can thrust kind of north-south, and there's some targets, like the solar plexus or the sternum certainly, where I'd want to do that. And then there's others where might want to strike the other way, so you're trying to fit the weapon to the target. Now here's one of the poses, and you can see I've got the blade down. This is from the kata, and again, a little bit atypical, right? Typical, like, steel, metal equivalent weapons, you wouldn't do that so much, but this way I'm able to do that sand scooping that we talked about, right? And there's kind of a rowing motion. You see how I almost look like I'm rowing a boat? There's a lot of that in the kata, so it's just a cool cultural preservation thing. It almost seems like they were so adept at, you're using it to row your boat all the time, that kind of motion made it into the fighting system. And that also engages your back muscles a lot, right? Just like with rowing. So that gives you a very strong motion with your arms, regardless of which end you're using, because you do use both ends of this weapon. And here's a particularly club-like one that I saw. This one's thick. You wouldn't want to take a shot with that one from either side. And that's about it. I hope that gives you some knowledge of and appreciation for this deceptive weapon, the Okinawan Eku. Thank you.